right, so I'm using Visual Studio Community because it's a smaller install. You can use, and it's a free install, you can use Visual Studio Professional and you can get it for free in the Getting Started module under resources for the DreamSpark. So this is Visual Studio. I'm going to create a new project here. I'm going to choose a console app for now. We'll start with that. When I click next, I'm going to tell it what to call it. So how about if we call this section 4.1, and this is 4.1. We'll call it loops. I'm going to tell it where I want to put it. I'm going to put it on my desktop. This is a great place to put it. So we'll put it on my desktop. And then when I click create, it's going to give me a brand new project with a main project file. And from here, if I want to run it and see what it does, I can press the green run button, which is a debugger. And it's going to build and compile the program down in the output window. And then it's going to pop a DOS box that I can see hello world. This is what it's going to say. It'll hold that box open until I press the enter key to continue. All right, so I'm going to clean this one up. I removed some of the comments. I actually removed the standard : cout and I replaced that with using namespace standard. I put a comment on the closing curly brace for my end, and I also included return 0. So I still see that I have my cout. So how about if we practice for loops to begin with? So the first thing that we're going to do is display the squares. How about if we go from 0 to 14? Let's see if we can create a for loop that will do that. So I might just cout something like squares from 0 to 14. And then we'll force an end line after that so that my output will be on the next line. And then I'm going to put my for loop. And inside of the parentheses on my for loop, we're going to have some kind of a start. So I'm going to declare a local variable called int j. Maybe I'll call it count. That's a little bit more descriptive name for a variable. I'm going to initialize it to 0. And then I need a semicolon. And then I'll put my condition, which is count less than 15, or I could say less than or equal to 14. So we could say less than or equal to 14 with a semicolon between that condition. And then I'm going to say count plus plus. So I need my opening and closing curly brace. I'm going to put a closing comment or a comment on that closing curly brace because if you'll notice, we might have 2 curly braces, 3 curly braces in a row. So I always want to label the closing curly brace so I don't get lost. And then the next thing that we're going to do, if we are displaying the squares, I'm just going to cout count multiplied by count. And then I am going to put a space between them. Maybe I'll put a comma space between them. And then I need the semicolon at the end of every executable line of code. And then let's just run it and see what happens. So it should give me all of the squares from 0 to 14. Up to and including 14. Now in order to separate it from the comment that is coming out after that, I'm going to force a couple of new lines. And I'm going to do that by just, I can do several end lines here, or I could just cout a string literal, a text literal that has the \n in it a couple of times to do that. I'm going to run it one more time, see if it kind of makes it a little bit more readable. There you go. So it kind of separated that from the comments down at the bottom. Press any key to close the window. All right, let's try another one just because we're on a roll. So how about if we display all the cubes from 2 to 10? So I might tell the user what it is that we're doing. So I might say that they are all the cubes from 2 to 10, something like that. And then we'll force an end line after that, and I'll do my for loop again. and I'm going to say int count. We'll set it equal to 2. I need my full colon between each one of the conditions in here, and I'll say as long as count is less than or equal to 10, that's as far as we want it to go. And then we will do count plus plus with my opening and closing curly brace, and I'll put a label on that closing curly brace so I know who it belongs to. And tabbed inside of the for loop for readability, we will just see out if we're going to do the cube. We could say count, oops, multiplied by count, multiplied by count. And then we'll run it and see what happens. So I can see that it mashed them all together. So maybe I want to make it a little bit more readable. So let's see if we can update our code to make this just a little bit more readable, or I should say a lot more readable. The way that we're going to make this more readable, I'm going to declare it a local variable. How about if we call this one cube? And I'm going to set it equal to count times count times count. And then I am going to see out. This time I'm going to set width. So let's see if we can set the width of each one of the field to 6. And then we will see out cube. And then how about if we force an inline after that? If you'll notice, set width is not happy. It's underlined in red. Do you remember what I need in order for set width to work? Yes, you're right. We're going to have to pound include IO manip. So IO manipulation, that's where we're going to get the set width from. And as soon as it has a chance to think about it, set width is happy now. So if I run it, let's see what it looks like. And there it is, formatted a lot better. So let's see if we can do a for loop that has multiple initialization and changes. So I'm going to actually create 2 variables. We're going to call the first one alpha. And then we'll create a second one called beta. And we're going to set beta equal to something like 115. And then I am going to see out something that says this is very different than Java. And then we'll put force a new line after that. And then we're going to do a for loop. And so a traditional for loop might say something like int count equals 0. And then I would have a condition as long as count is, let's say for instance, count is less than 25. And then I'm going to do a semicolon. I'm going to increment my counter variable through the plus plus. I'll have my opening and closing curly braces with my comment on my closing curly brace. So I have my counter variable. Oh, those need to be semicolons, by the way. But this time I'm also going to have a second variable in there. So I'm going to separate a comma, separate my counter variable by another variable. How about if I set alpha equal to 100? So now I have a count variable equal to 0, and I have my alpha variable, which was declared on line 28. I'm going to initialize that one to 100, or set it to 100. I have a single condition, which is as long as my count is less than 25. But this time what I'm going to do is I'm going to increment my counter variable, and I'm going to decrement beta. So I'm going to do beta minus minus. So I'm going to decrement beta while I'm incrementing my count variable. And then let's see what we can do. How about if we see out all of these? So we're going to start with alpha. Let's see what is inside of alpha. And then we will do, let's set width, we'll set a width of 4 for this field where, we're going to set that width, my apologies, we're going to set alpha. All right, there you go. So I want to set the width for alpha to be 4 characters wide. And then after that, we will display beta. And so I'm going to put a tab inside of a text field. So we'll tab, and then I will say beta. And then we will set the width of this one to 4 as well. And we'll display beta. And then we'll put an inline after that. As a matter of fact, I'm going to come up here, and between these two runs of the program, I'm just going to force a couple of new lines there. All right. All right, I can see that my beta variable on line 35 is unhappy. So I am just going to declare it on its own line, and then I'll have to change that to a semicolon after alpha, and beta should be much happier. All right, so I forced a couple of new lines before that, and now let's run it and see what ends up happening. So this is what I'm getting. Alpha is staying the same. I can see that beta is decrementing, and ultimately this loop should be running 25 times. Because if I look at this, alpha is staying the same at 100. My counter variable is counting down from counting up from 0 to 25. It will continue to loop as long as my count variable is less than 25. That is incrementing my count variable, and this is decrementing my beta variable. So what we are seeing here in this very unusual for loop is that we have two initializations, and we have two changes of condition, and they are comma separated, but we only have one test, or one test for the condition, and that condition is count less than 25.